In recent years, a lot of people around the world are adopting what's called a ketogenic diet because it's a very, very powerful way of eating. And that is the diet that I follow. You know, since I made the video on intermittent fasting, a lot of people have been asking me, what kind of diet do I follow? So what I'm going to do in this video is explain what the ketogenic diet is, what are the benefits and why is it so beneficial. Then I'm going to address some of the risks involved and how I overcome those risks. And then finally, I'll explain how to implement a ketogenic diet. I'm going to cover a lot of information in this video. It's going to be a beast, which tends to be the way my videos are going these days. So first of all, what is a ketogenic diet? Here's my definition. It's a high-fat, low-carb diet that causes the body to become a fat-burning machine. I'll explain more on that particular point later in the video. Why is it called ketogenic? The reason it's called a ketogenic diet is because it causes the body to enter into a state called ketosis. Now, what is ketosis? Ketosis means that the body is burning primarily ketones for fuel instead of glucose. Most people are burning primarily glucose from carbohydrates as their main source of fuel. I think a good analogy here is like a car. You know, a car needs petrol or diesel to provide with energy. Just like cars, human beings need some source of energy, and most people, like I said, are running on glucose. But the ketogenic diet causes a major metabolic shift away from glucose and towards ketones. Yes, we'll still burn small amounts of glucose on the ketogenic diet, but like I said, ketones become our primary fuel, especially for the brain. So that's what ketosis is. It just means that our bodies are burning primarily ketones for fuel. Now, how does that happen? Well, it can happen in a number of ways. For one, if you stop eating food, this is a good way to explain ketosis, I feel. If you stop eating food, all of a sudden, there's very low glucose availability for the body. The body's like, you know, I need energy. Where's the glucose? Especially the brain. Our brains are very hungry for glucose, and our brains use like 20% of the energy in our bodies. Our brains, like I said, very hungry for fuel. So what happens when food isn't coming in? The body realizes there's not much glucose around, not much fuel. So the liver comes to the rescue by breaking down our fat stores into these things called ketones. Ketones are like water-soluble molecules that can be used by the body and the brain for energy. So it's really like an evolutionary adaptation that took place that enabled us to switch fuels because we needed this. We need to be able to burn ketones. Humanity wouldn't be here if we didn't have this capacity to enter into ketosis. Now, so that's one way it can be achieved, is removing food. Also, if you significantly restrict carbohydrates, if carbohydrates are very low, the same thing happens because the body doesn't have that constant source of glucose. It needs an alternative fuel, and so it switches to ketones. And like 70% of the brain's energy can be derived from ketones. It will switch over massively. And some research suggests that our hearts and our lungs and our muscles prefer ketones for fuel and prefer fatty acids for fuel. Now, that's what ketosis is. Like I said, it can be induced by fasting or very low carbohydrates. Another way it can be induced is by consuming large amounts of medium chain triglycerides. That's a certain type of fat. One of the best sources of that is coconut oil. I'll talk more about that later. So yeah, they're the main ways. And that's why, like I said at the start, it's a high fat, low carb diet. Remove the carbs, increase the fat, and the body will shift into fat burning metabolism, ketone burning metabolism. So yeah, that's what it is. Now let's move on to the next question. What are the benefits? There's a lot of benefits. And that's why so many people around the world are doing it. The first one, and one of the main reasons people do it, is fat loss. Like I said, it causes the body to turn into a fat burning machine. How does it do that? Well, a lot of changes take place in the body. Physiological, metabolic changes take place. The first one of which is low insulin. Because there isn't much glucose in our bodies, our insulin levels tend to be low. Insulin is a storage hormone, so when that's low, our bodies can access the fat from our stores for energy. So low insulin, also on the ketogenic diet, suppressed mTOR. mTOR is an enzyme in our cells that's involved in like storage and building. So when on a ketogenic diet, that gets suppressed, which helps our bodies to enter into energy burning mode. This video is practically like a biology lesson. I know that. And I'm interested in a lot of subjects. Anything to do with human flourishing, whether it's psychology, biology, anything to do with health, I'm into it. So yeah, like I said, this is like a biology lesson. And I've been studying a lot of physiology and biology lately. So yeah, that's suppressed mTOR. Next one, activated AMPK. AMPK is also an enzyme, but it has like the opposite effect to mTOR. mTOR is all about the storage and the building. AMPK is all about energy burning mode. It's very healthy for us to have AMPK activated. And when AMPK is activated, we're burning fat, we're burning glucose, we're burning everything. Even something called autophagy gets switched on, which is very, very healthy for us as well. I talked about that in my intermittent fasting video. The next one, elevated glucagon. Glucagon is a hormone involved in fat burning. It helps with the release of fatty acids from our fat stores. So yeah, elevated glucagon. When the blood glucose and the insulin are low, glucagon tends to be high. Again, that's the fat burning hormone. Also, elevated growth hormone on a ketogenic diet. Because the glucose and the insulin are low, growth hormone tends to be high. That helps with fat burning as well. So as we can see, a lot of powerful hormonal changes taking place, causing the body to really transform into a fat burning machine, like I said. The next one, the mitochondria in our cells, they're like the energy burning making factories. So think of an energy making factory in our cells. That's what the mitochondria are. They will switch to burning primarily fat and ketones for fuel, like I said earlier in the video. So, we're transforming on a cellular level when we adopt a ketogenic diet. That metabolic shift takes place in the mitochondria. What else? Because there are less spikes in glucose, that means less hunger. Our hunger levels are very much tied in with our glucose ups and downs. So if you're eating carbs, your blood glucose gets spiked, and as it falls, that tends to cause like a hunger pang. That's why most people eat like a little bit of carbs at breakfast, then they're hungry again by lunch, they eat a little bit more carbs, hungry again by dinner. The blood glucose is going up and down, and that's causing the hunger. That's eliminated on the ketogenic diet. One of the reasons I love it, to be honest with you. But yeah, that also means that you eat less food. You're less hungry, so you eat less food. Let's see what else we have. Less spikes in glucose means less hunger. Suppressed ghrelin. Ghrelin is known as the hunger hormone, and ketosis has been associated with suppressed ghrelin. So again, that means less hunger, less food eaten, and that means more fat burning and less body fat storage. And it also affects something called CCK, has a positive effect on CCK. That's another hormone involving hunger. Finally, in relation to fat loss, excess ketones get excreted from the body. Any ketones that we're not using, we excrete them via the urine and the breath. And why I'm mentioning that is because that doesn't happen with glucose. If you're eating carbs and you've got excess glucose that isn't being used, that's going to get stored as energy. It's going to get stored either as glycogen in our muscles and liver, or else fat, commonly fat, because our liver and muscles can't store that much glucose. So excess carbs, excess glucose tends to turn to fat. That doesn't happen with ketones. So yeah, that's fat loss. As we can see, very, very powerful for fat loss. Now I'm going to move on to muscle mass. There's a big question mark over whether ketogenic diet is suitable for building muscle, because it tends to promote low insulin levels. People are saying, it's not good for building muscle. Okay, here's my opinion on it. and some research backs this up as well, I think it's probably not the optimal way of eating for building muscle because of that low insulin factor. But I think it might be very well be the healthiest way to build muscle for various reasons that I'll explain in a second. And it can be a very, very effective way to build muscle. Absolutely, which I'll explain now as well. And I'm living proof of this fact. I'm living proof of the fact that you can build muscle on a ketogenic diet. I've been building muscle in the past few months. If you compare my body right now to my intermittent fasting video, I am significantly chunkier, and I've done that on a ketogenic diet. So yeah, living proof right here. How is it good for building muscle? First of all, let's address the health aspect. You know, on a high carb diet, you're going to have chronically elevated insulin and chronically activated mTOR. They're both associated with growth and storage, so that might increase the risk of cancerous cells growing if they're chronically activated. So on a ketogenic diet, you're reducing those risks because your insulin and mTOR aren't chronically activated. They will be activated some of the time, but not chronically. So I think that's eliminating some risks associated with cancer cells growing and other things growing that we don't want to grow. So that's the first thing. Also, in relation to it being an effective way to build muscle, you know, muscle is a storage organ. So if we do resistance training and build muscle, our muscles will start to store more fat, as well as protein and a little bit of carbs. Our muscles store fat. So if you're eating the right amounts of fat and protein and carbs, the muscles will grow and they will store that fat. That's often not talked about much, but it's an important one when it comes to building muscle. Also, fats are the building blocks of our cells. You know, we need fats for the structural membranes of our cells. So if we want to grow new cells, we want to make sure we're getting a nice supply of fats. And that's what we're doing on a ketogenic diet. Next one, it tends to be protein sparing. If we're getting a lot of fat from our diet, that's going to be protein sparing, which means that our bodies don't have to break down the protein from our muscles for fuel because there's so much energy around, because there's so much fat. So that will help to protect our muscle protein and use whatever protein we consume to build muscle. So yeah, protein sparing. High testosterone. You know, fat is involved in the production of testosterone, and testosterone is a muscle building hormone. So that's a very key one. Also, on a ketogenic diet, this one's to do with growth hormone secretion. Because the insulin and the glucose are low on a ketogenic diet, that tends to promote or increase the secretion of growth hormone when it does get secreted, and growth hormone is involved in muscle building as well. Now you might be saying, oh wait a second, you said that we need to reduce the risks of cancer by not being chronically in growth mode. But the point I'm making is, on a ketogenic diet, we're not chronically in growth mode, but sometimes we are in growth mode. There's far more of a balance between energy breakdown mode and then growth mode on a ketogenic diet, a certain type of ketogenic diet, which is the one that I follow, and I'll explain more on that later. So yeah, elevated growth hormone means more fat burning and more muscle building. Now let's move on to the final factor when it comes to muscle mass. There might actually be kind of like a springback effect when it comes to mTOR. Remember I mentioned mTOR is to do with it's the enzyme involved in growth and storage. I like to think of an analogy using like a beach ball to explain this springback effect. You know, if you hold a beach ball under the water and push it down, it will then bounce out of the water higher. It's possible that the same thing happens with mTOR. When you suppress mTOR, that growth building enzyme on a ketogenic diet, then when you eat food later, it may very well spring back harder. I learned this one from Dave Asprey. I haven't seen the studies on that. I did look for them, but yeah, I learned that one from Dave Asprey. Spring back effect of mTOR, making it beneficial for growth building as well. Okay, now let's move on to the third major benefit that a lot of people are reporting: energy. Many people who transition to the ketogenic diet say that their energy levels increase and they get more stable, sustained energy throughout the day. I can attest to that 100%. My energy levels are never better today than they ever were before in my life. The ketogenic diet is very, very powerful for energy. And here's why. I like to think of another analogy. Being on a ketogenic diet, when it comes to energy, it's like burning a log in a fire instead of burning twigs to keep the fire going. If you're on a carbohydrate diet, it is like using twigs to keep the fire going. You eat some carbs, you get the glucose, that gives you energy for a while. Then the glucose levels drop down, like I talked about a while ago, and you need more carbs to fill it back up. It's like feeding twigs into a fire. When you eliminate those highs and lows, and I'll just speak for myself now, when I switch to burning primarily fat and ketones, that is like a log in the fire. The fat and the ketones just provide this steady source of energy throughout the day. So that's the main reason that explains why so many people are just finding newfound energy levels on a ketogenic diet. Another one, like I said a while ago, the enzyme AMPK is activated on a ketogenic diet. That's like flicking on a switch of energy burning mode. It's like AMPK is energy burning mode switch. So when that's on, we're in energy burning mode, so we're going to have more energy. Next, research suggests that more energy is produced by the mitochondria, those energy making factories in the cells. They make more energy from ketones than they do from glucose. This is especially in the brain I'm talking about now. More ATP is what it's called. The mitochondria produce ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is like the energy currency of our bodies. And like I said, research suggests that our mitochondria produce more ATP from ketones than glucose. So our mitochondria become more efficient on a ketogenic diet. So yeah, more energy right there. Also, ketosis is associated with an increased number of mitochondria in the brain. Literally, our brain grows more of these energy-making factories on a ketogenic diet. So it's no wonder that when a lot of people switch to a ketogenic diet, it's like the lights get switched on, man, and their energy just reaches new levels altogether. And that kind of ties in with the next one, mental performance. A lot of people report like improved thinking, clearer thinking, and just better cognitive performance, even better memory, better performance at work, better performance in sports as well, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But yeah, improved mental performance. Why is the ketogenic diet so powerful for cognitive performance? Well, all of the factors mentioned so far are going to contribute. The increased mitochondria, that's called mitochondrial biogenesis, by the way, when new mitochondria grow in our brains. And the increased ATP production, the AMPK activation, energy burning mode, that's going to contribute to mental performance. Everything said so far will. Also, the elimination of the highs and lows in blood glucose, that stable supply of energy from ketones and fat, they're all going to contribute to mental performance. Also, there are some other factors. Ketosis is associated with a positive effect on brain chemistry, particularly something called GABA. GABA is it's often known as the calming neurotransmitter because it tends to have a calming effect on our brains and on our nervous system. So yeah, ketosis is associated with a positive effect on that. It's also associated with reduced production of reactive oxygen species, ROS. These are like free radicals that can cause damage in our cells. So in the brain, ketosis is associated with a decrease in those. So that basically just means that we'll have healthier, better performing brains. which helps to explain why mental performance improves on a ketogenic diet. Finally, in relation to mental performance, increased antioxidant activity in the brain. Ketosis is associated with an increase in something called glutathione. Glutathione is, I think it's referred to as like the master antioxidant in our bodies. So ketosis can increase that, which means our brains get better at dealing with the free radicals that I just talked about. So, you've got a double whammy going on there. If it's already reducing the production of free radicals, and then it's also increasing the production of antioxidants like glutathione, that's a very powerful combination right there. So it's no wonder that many people are reporting improved mental performance. Now let's move on to physical performance. Again, all of the factors I mentioned so far are going to contribute to physical performance. There are athletes, professional athletes who are switching to this type of diet. One famous example is LeBron James. He's on some kind of ketogenic diet. And then there are like famous sports nutritionists who are really advocating this type of diet for athletic performance and for health and longevity, like Timothy Noakes. I think he's from South Africa. He's a big advocate of this way of eating now. And he used to promote high carbs for many, many years. I think he even wrote a book about it. So he's gone in the opposite direction now, and he's singing the praises of this way of eating. And like I said, all of the factors talked about so far will contribute to physical performance as well. Also, this is key when it comes to physical performance. Keto adapted people who are adapted to burning ketones for fuel, especially in the brain, they have greater metabolic flexibility or efficiency, greater metabolic efficiency. What I mean by that is, because they have adapted to ketones, they now have access to different sources of fuel for their physical exercise, whether it's training in a gym or performing in a sport. Keto adapted people can burn ketones and fat for the low energy work, the low intensity work, and then they can burn glycogen for the high intensity work. Whereas people who aren't adapted to ketones and fat tend to just run primarily on glucose and glycogen, so they don't have the same metabolic efficiency. So that's a very big advantage when it comes to athletes as well. Now let's move on to health. Again, all of the factors I've mentioned so far are going to be very powerful for a person's health. Like I've spoken about the brain, I've spoken about AMPK activation. That's key when it comes to health. You're talking about increased fat burning, increased autophagy. Autophagy is like cellular cleaning. The cells go into like recycle mode and recycling damaged things that are hanging around. So the ketogenic diet is associated with AMPK activation. That's associated with increased autophagy, a stronger immune system, reduced inflammation. And many experts are saying that the more AMPK we have going for us, just the more youthful and healthy and vibrant we are. In relation to health, the ketogenic diet has been used to treat epilepsy for a long time. I think they first started that in the 1920s. It reduces seizures in people, especially children, because of the beneficial effects it has on the brain. Now researchers are saying that it might be a powerful way to treat cancer or even prevent cancer. I think there's one man named Thomas Seyfried. He's written a very, very comprehensive book summarizing the research on the ketogenic diet as an alternative treatment for cancer, because cancer cells feed on glucose. So the theory is that removing the glucose and switching to ketones helps to starve off the cancer cells. And many other benefits that are associated with the ketogenic diet as well will also help with preventing or treating cancer. Next, research suggests now that it may be a powerful way to prevent a host of neurological conditions, things to do with the brain, like Alzheimer and Parkinson's, and no wonder, considering everything we talked about. Look, I could go on about health all day. It's very, very powerful for health. I'm a living example of that myself. I'm absolutely thriving. on a ketogenic diet. So I am. I've never been stronger and healthier in my life, and I'm pretty much full ketogenic these days. I'm just going to wrap up the health benefits in one comprehensive line. The bottom line is a well-formulated ketogenic diet, and well-formulated is key because it needs to have the right balance of different nutrients. A well-formulated ketogenic diet has the potential to reduce the risk of a multitude of diseases, slow down the aging process, increase the lifespan, optimize a person's health, energy levels, mental well-being, physical appearance, skin, hair and nails, and just the shape of the body, and everything is influenced by the hormones. So physical appearance and just day-to-day performance at life. All right, I think I've spoken enough about the benefits now and the why. I've really provided a comprehensive rationale as to why I do it anyway, and to explain why so many people are benefiting from it tremendously. I just have to say at this point as well, I've kind of been really putting it on a pedestal throughout this video. I have to say, and I'll emphasize this again later, different strokes for different folks. This is not the be all and end all for everybody. Some people thrive on it, some people thrive on other diets. That has to be emphasized as well. Now, with that said, how do you implement a ketogenic diet? The typical guidelines are as follows. You want to keep carbs low. These are typical guidelines. There's ways to kind of manipulate these as well if you know what you're doing. But yeah, the typical guidelines are keep carbs low, less than 50 grams a day. That's virtually, that's like no starchy carbohydrates right there. For those of you who don't know how many grams of carbs are in food, that's just very low carb. That's removing all of your carbs, because you'll get carbs from if you eat green vegetables, you'll get a little bit of carbs from those, but you don't want to be eating like potatoes and rice and pasta and things like that. You got to eliminate all of that on a ketogenic diet. So low carbs, less than 50 grams a day. Protein, you want to be like less than 120 grams of protein a day. If you eat too much protein, that can be anti-ketogenic because it can promote something called, or lead to something called gluconeogenesis. That means that our bodies will start converting protein into glucose, which, like I said, is anti-ketogenic. So yeah, we want to keep protein kind of restricted as well. Fat, the majority of a person's calories are going to be coming from fat on a ketogenic diet. Like 70 to 80% of calories will come from fat, and it's important to get a variety of fats, which I'll talk more about later. So those are the typical guidelines. Now I'll answer the question, how do I do it? What's my ketogenic diet like? Okay, carbs. I consume approximately 85 grams of carbs a day. Now that is very, very low carb. It's not as low as the typical guidelines of the ketogenic diet. I'll explain why I get away with that in a minute and why I do it. Protein. I consume about 85 grams of protein a day, give or take, 10 to 20 grams, but roughly about 85 grams of protein and 85 grams of carbs. And then fat, I consume a lot of fat from different sources. You're talking like about 280 grams of fat a day I consume. Total calories, I consume approximately 3,200 calories a day, give or take 100 or 200. In general, I don't really count my macros and my calories, but I've been doing it lately in preparation for this video and to just really hone in my ketogenic diet. Now, in relation to the foods that I eat, I'll mention some of them in a minute, but this video isn't really going to be about that. I think I'll have to make another video in which I'll talk about the foods that I eat. But right now, I just want to lay that out in terms of the macronutrients and the energy. Macronutrients are carbs, protein, and fats. And that's approximately how much of those I consume. I use MyFitnessPal. For those of you out there wondering, how can I estimate my macros? MyFitnessPal is a good one. There's a lot of different online softwares for doing that. Now let's address the question, why do I eat more carbs than the typical guidelines for the ketogenic diet? And how do I get away with that? Well, the main reason I get away with it is because I fast a lot of the time. I fast for like about 18 hours out of 24 hours. And that fasting guarantees that I enter ketosis for long periods of time. So because I do that, I can get away with eating a little bit of carbs in my evening meal because I'm not going to eat again for like 18 to 20 hours. So that helps guarantee ketosis for me. Now, this begs the question, why would I even want to eat carbs? Well, first of all, I want metabolic flexibility. What I mean by that is I want my body to be able to handle some carbs now and then. I don't want my body to like get completely derailed if I ever have a little bit of carbs. No, I want metabolic flexibility. I think when it comes to being a really robust human, we want to be able to eat a variety of macronutrient ratios. Now, you know, I like being in ketosis a lot of the time, but then I want metabolic flexibility. I want to be able to consume carbs now and then. So that's what I do. That's one reason. Also, I want the carbs to like refuel my muscle glycogen. You know, I do resistance training nearly every single day these days. So I'm using the stored glucose in my muscles when I train. So I want to replenish that with some carbs in the evening. Another reason, the insulin spike in the evening I feel is beneficial for me. When I eat those carbs, I'll get that insulin spike. Remember from earlier, insulin is a storage hormone. So that spike in the evening will help me to become anabolic. Anabolic means like build up mode. And yeah, mTOR will get activated as well in the evening time when I eat the carbs and that kind of thing. So yeah, it helps me to enter anabolic mode in the evening and build up and repair, that kind of thing. Also, an insulin spike in the evening, it helps my brain to make serotonin. And that's very important for my sleep and my mental well-being. Insulin is involved in the production of serotonin. I think it transports an amino acid called tryptophan into our brains, which is involved in making serotonin. So yeah, insulin important for that as well. You know, we need a little bit of insulin spikes now and then, I feel. And this brings me on to one of the main reasons that I like a little bit of carbs now and then is I want to avoid all of the other risks that come along with being very low carb. There are some risks. And this brings me on to the next main question. Where is it? My notes here. Okay, what risks are associated with the ketogenic diet? First of all, thyroid issues. The thyroid is a gland in here, very important gland involved in our metabolism and lots of other important things. Insulin is involved in the thyroid hormones. I think it's the conversion of one thyroid hormone into another one. So sometimes people who go on very low carb diets for a long time end up with thyroid issues. So that's one of the reasons why I like to have a little bit of carbs. It's good for my thyroid health. The next one is gut health issues. Certain carbs give us something called resistant starch. Resistant starch is resistant to digestion in our bodies. What happens is it feeds the gut flora, the good bacteria in our guts get fed on resistant starch, and the gut flora then turn it into short chain fatty acids, which is very beneficial for our gut health, our brain health, lots of benefits. So if a person doesn't have any carbs in their diet, they might not be getting resistant starch. So it can have a negative impact on their gut flora. I think it's called gut dysbiosis is what some people end up with from being too low carb for too long. So yeah, I consume some resistant starch every day. Just Google sources of resistant starch. I like to go for cashew nuts. I have about 50 to 70 grams of cashew nuts a day. That provides me with some resistant starch for my gut flora. Next, tears, saliva and mucus. You know, glucose is involved in the production of those. Tears, saliva and mucus. So some people on very low carb diets end up with like dry eyes or even stomach cancer due to the lack of mucus. So it's important to get a little bit of glucose to make those things. Another issue on a ketogenic diet is dehydration. Our bodies don't store as much water on a ketogenic diet as other diets, as regular moderate carbohydrate diets. Our bodies don't store as much water on them. We tend to like flush it out more, so we need to drink more to stay hydrated. I drink about anywhere between 2 to 4 liters of water a day. Many days I consume nearly a gallon of water a day. So yeah, hydration, very key on a ketogenic diet. Next one, sodium. A lack of sodium, as well as the water loss on a ketogenic diet, we tend to flush out more sodium. Sodium is very important for our cellular functioning, so we want to make sure we're getting sodium every day on a ketogenic diet. I consume probably about 1 to 2 teaspoons of sodium a day. Sea salt. I put sea salt on my meals to make sure I get enough of that. The next one, risk associated with the ketogenic diet. Athletes or people doing lots of high intensity exercise, they may need more carbs than most people to fuel their hard physical work and to replenish their glycogen stores, like I talked about a while ago. So some athletes or high intensity exercisers, if they go low carb, they can end up actually having a negative impact on themselves and burning out or other health issues. So they may need more carbs. Also, pregnant women may need more carbs than the average person for the fetal development of the child. So that's a very important one to watch out for. The next two are to do with the fats. You know, it's common to eat a lot of coconut oil. I consume a lot of coconut oil, probably about 2 to 3 tablespoons of coconut oil a day, because it's high in medium chain triglycerides, which get converted into ketones very, very quickly by the liver. So coconut oil is very good on a ketogenic diet, but if it's not balanced out with short chain fatty acids, it can actually cause inflammation. There's some research suggesting that. So like I said a while ago, we need to get the balance right between our different nutrients, and balancing coconut oil with short chain fatty acids is key here to reduce that inflammation, keep the inflammation low, and actually have the opposite effect, make the diet anti-inflammatory. Where do we get short chain fatty acids? Well, green vegetables. Vegetables are a great place to get them. Also butter. That's why I consume butter every day as well. Real grass-fed Kerrygold butter is a good source of butyrate, short chain fatty acid, which again helps to counteract any negative implications from coconut oil. So yeah, that's a risk associated with the ketogenic diet, eating too much coconut oil and not enough short chain fatty acids. Another risk is eating too much saturated fat without balancing it with omega-3. If our diet is high in saturated fat, we need to make sure we're getting omega-3 as well. That's why every day at the moment I'm taking cod liver oil as my main source of omega-3. I also eat salmon regularly. So yeah, I'm striving to balance out the saturated fat with the omega-3. If you don't have that omega-3, it's possible that a high saturated fat diet might lead to inflammation. Now, what is inflammation? I think that's a topic for another video, but let's just put it like this. Sometimes our bodies need a little bit of inflammation to heal themselves, but oftentimes inflammation becomes chronic, and it's very likely that chronic inflammation is at the root of many adverse health conditions. So yeah, we want to balance out the saturated fat intake with the omega-3. Now, that's it for most of the risks associated with low carb dieting and high fat. The next question, how do you know if you're in ketosis? How do you know if you're keto adapted? Okay, 3 of the most common ways used by people to test for ketosis are: number 1, urine strips that people urinate onto, and they give some kind of indication. What they do is they measure a certain one of the 3 ketones. There are 3 main ketones produced in our bodies, and these urine strips, they're actually limited, and I wouldn't recommend them because they only measure one of the ketones, and it's not even the main ketone. The main ketone is called beta hydroxybutyrate, BHB. The urine strips don't even measure that. They only measure one of the other ones. And as well as that, after a few weeks, the urine isn't a good indication of ketosis, because our kidneys can actually start to reabsorb some of the ketones that's moving through them. So urine strips aren't a good one, but they are commonly used by people. The next one is a blood testing device. There are blood testing devices out there which are very accurate, and they measure beta hydroxybutyrate, the main ketone. So blood testing devices, probably the best way to go. And then there's also breath testing devices that you blow into. I think it's called ketonics. And research shows that the breath testing ones are highly correlated with the blood. So breath testing is accurate, in other words. Now, to be honest with you, I actually don't use any of those things. I have other ways of gauging it. Some people might say, that's not accurate enough. You don't truly know if you're in ketosis. Well, I think I do. And there are very clear ways to gauge it, especially when you're very much in touch with your body and with your nutrition. You know, I've been dedicated to health and fitness my entire life. What am I now? I'm nearly 30 years old chronologically now. I've been dedicated to health and fitness my entire life. So I'm very much in touch with my body and I know what's going on. Here are some of the ways that I use to gauge it. First of all, my breath. My breath, when I'm in ketosis, there tends to be just a subtle fruity, or even, it's fruity. It's a kind of fruity taste or smell from my breath. Another one, the reason for the breath thing is because we excrete some of the ketones through our breath, so you can literally smell them. Another one is, if I'm easily fasting for 18 to 20 hours without even getting hungry and just crushing it during that time period, that's a very clear indication that I'm in ketosis and I'm burning mainly fat and ketones for fuel. If I was a glucose burning person, I wouldn't be able to do the fasting so easily. So that's a key indication. Also, if I'm training hard while fasting, I go to the gym and do hard workouts without having eaten food for like 18 to 20 hours because I'm in ketosis. It's a very clear indication that I'm in ketosis. Also, there's the fact that, like I said, I consume 80% of my calories from fat. And there's lots of MCTs, there's lots of medium chain triglycerides from the coconut oil in my calories. So, you know, it's pretty much guaranteed that I'm in ketosis if I'm consuming all that coconut oil and all the fat. Yeah, ketosis right there, my friend. One thing I gotta warn you about before I bring this to a conclusion is something called the keto flu. The keto flu, when people decide that they want to try this dietary approach, this way of eating and living, because it's such a profound metabolic shift, metabolic transformation that takes place, for a couple of weeks the body might be in shock. The body might be in shock and experience symptoms like tiredness, lethargy, even headaches. It's almost like coming off drugs, coming off those carbs. I experienced the keto flu for the first time back in 2014. Summer 2014 was the first time that I transitioned to very, very low carb, high fat. And yeah, for like 2 weeks, I felt like a slug, a dying slug. And I remember I was working in a gym back then at the time, which wasn't a good place to be when you're adapting to a ketogenic diet. But yeah, that was hard, man. That was hard. Very, very low energy, walking around like I said, like a dying slug. So you got to watch out for that. It can take a couple of weeks. Some people just shift right into a ketogenic diet and just energy levels go up, and there's not much of a keto flu. But for many people, it can take anywhere from a few days to some people like 6 weeks. And I think to become fully adapted, it could take several months. So, but when you do, then you've got the metabolic machinery in place to burn those fats and those ketones. I've been metabolically adapted to ketones and fats since then. So I did have to go through a couple of weeks of torture and low energy and lethargy. But I'm glad I did it, because now I'm very, very metabolically flexible, metabolically efficient, and yeah, all of those good things that I've talked about. I think it's time to bring this to a conclusion. You know, there is a lot of evidence emerging to support the benefits that I've talked about, both anecdotal evidence from many people around the world and evidence from scientific studies. So, you know, as well, look at the people who are interested in the ketogenic diet. The anti-aging experts, the anti-aging community, very much focused on the ketogenic diet. Many of those experts believe that it slows down the aging process and increases the lifespan. Who else? The US military are interested in it now because they believe it can help to optimize the soldiers' performance. If they're not carbohydrate dependent and having to eat meals so regularly, it's going to improve their capacity to go for a long time without food and instead just rely on their own fat stores and ketones for fuel. You know, optimizing performance, ketogenic diet, very powerful for some people. Also, NASA are looking at it. I think NASA are doing research on it because some research indicates it can improve the resilience of our brains to stress and to radiation. So NASA suspect that it will empower astronauts who want to go on long missions to like Mars. It will empower astronauts to do their work better. You know, and like I said, look, many people are thriving on this kind of approach to eating and living, and I'm one of them. I'm standing here right now and I'm living proof. Some of the main reasons that I love it is because, one, I don't have to eat for 18 to 20 hours. I'm a guy, I like making progress. I don't like things that slow me down. I find food kind of slows me down. And as well as that, the energy levels, the mental performance, everything I talked about, I can attest to it myself. Such a powerful strategy. When employed in the right way, you've got to get it right too. You've got to get it right. It's like an art and a science to getting the ketogenic diet right for you. Different approaches will work for different people. This brings me on to the final thing I want to say. I already touched on it earlier. The bottom line of nutrition is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. We each need to try different approaches, pay attention to the results, pay attention to our health, our weight, our appearance, everything, all of the markers of health and performance. Pay attention to them and modify our approach to nutrition and exercise and all of the other areas that contribute to our health and well-being. Pay attention to the results and modify as we go along. Different approaches work for different people. I'm going to leave it there for this video, guys. I know I've talked for a long time. As usual, if you made it this far, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. If you've any questions, I might not know your answers, but shoot them as well in the comments below. I suspect that this video may get a lot of views. You know, a lot of people are interested in this subject around the world, and I'm not surprised because it is transformational, and that's what I'm all about, is transforming into our strongest, healthiest selves and thriving in every way we can. That is it for this video, my friends. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time, take care of yourself. Peace.